We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 142a. And the previous Amud Rav Huna said that Hamizakil Uber, if somebody tries to transfer ownership of something to an Uber, to a fetus, a child that's not yet born, lo kana, that is not a kinyan, because you're not able to give something to an entity that does not yet exist. And the Gemara asked a question from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah seems to say explicitly that you are able to transfer, talking specifically about a father transferring some of his inheritance. It sounds like you are able to transfer to an Uber, to a fetus. And the Gemara now says, V'lei molei, well, why doesn't Rav Huna say to him that our Mishnah is Da'amar Likisheteled? Maybe our Mishnah means when the child is actually born, at that point, the transfer will take place. Why don't we interpret the Mishnah in that fashion, and then it will not be a problem for Rav Huna? The Rashbam explains, V'lema Rav Huna masnisen do'amar imteled ishti zachar. Here's what our Mishnah might mean. If my wife gives birth to a male child, tenule monet likisheteled, give him 100 dinar when he's actually born. The lo zachi le klum ad sheivalid, meaning he's not actually owning anything until he's born. V'yein zamezaka le'ubra, and that would not be the same case as Rav Huna was talking about of trying to transfer something to a fetus. The amrina le'el de lo kana, which we said earlier, is not a kinyan. And the Gemara continues, Rav Huna l'taimeh. Rav Huna here is following his opinion, his reasoning. The Amar Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says, af likasheteled, even in a case of likasheteled, where you're transferring and you're saying it's only going to be transferred when the child is born, but even that, since you're making the statement when the child is not yet born, lo kana, that is not a kinyan, so that would not be a good answer for the Mishnah. The Amar of Nachman, because Rav Nachman says, hamizakil uber lo kana, if somebody tries to transfer something to a fetus, it's not a kinyan. Likasheteled kana, but if you phrased it as likasheteled, it is a kinyan. For Rav Huna Amar, but Rav Huna says, af likasheteled lo kana, even if you phrase it as likasheteled, it is not a kinyan. For Rav Shesha Amar, Rav Shesha says, echad zeh v'echad zeh, in both situations, meaning in all situations, even a regular case of mezakil uber kana, we do say that it is a kinyan. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Shesha says, Mino aminala, from where can I say to you, from where can I prove that in all situations mezakil uber is a good kinyan? Titania, because we learned in a brayso as follows. Ger shemesu vizvizu yisrael nechasav. Let's say a ger, a convert, dies. The point here is that he is a convert, so he doesn't have any relatives to inherit his property. His property is considered ownerless, and so Jews, they all swarm upon the property to take the property. But then vishamu sheyesh lo ben. But then they hear that he actually has a son. There actually is a yoresh. O shahaisa ishto meuberes, or they hear that his wife is pregnant, and so again the fetus here is going to be yoresh. Chayavin lahachzer. So then they're chayav to return. It has to go back to the proper yoresh. And hechziru hakol, let's say they return everything. V'yachar kach shamu, but then they hear shemeis beno, that the son died, or shehipila ishto, or that the wife had a miscarriage, so there's no yoresh. So hechzik b'shniya kana, so if they make a chazak, if they make a kinyan now a second time, that's a good kinyan. Uvarishona lo kana, but relying on that first kinyan is not going to be a good kinyan. And so the Gemara now continues. Now, if you think, if it should enter your mind that a fetus does not acquire anything, so then in this situation, one of the cases over here was that they heard that his wife was pregnant, and so the fetus, if you're going to say doesn't acquire anything, it hasn't acquired anything yet, then there's a miscarriage. So why do they have to make a second chazaka? Really, their original chazaka should be perfectly good, because hamizakil uber lo kana. But it must be that the Bryce is saying that really, even as an uber, as a fetus, the fetus has already been kona, and that's why that first kinyan that they made is not going to be good. And so again, if you would say otherwise, didn't they already make a chazaka? Obviously, that first chazaka was not good, and that shows that mezakil uber is a kinyan. But the Gemara says it doesn't show anything. Amar Abaye says, Yerusha haba me'eleh shani. That case is different because it's a Yerusha, it's an inheritance. You're not actively transferring something to an Uber. It's just automatic. It happens as an inheritance, and therefore over there, even if we say the Uber is Kohen, would not prove to a case of mezakil Uber. And the Gemara continues with another answer. Rava Amar Rava says, Shani Hasam, it's different over there. The Rifui Merafion Biyodayu Meikara. And the Rashbam explains Rava's answer. V'Rava Amar, and Rava says, Liola Meimelach, really I'll say to you, Loshna hamezakil uber, Loshna Yerusha haba meila. There really is no difference between a regular case of mezakil uber or a situation where the uber is inheriting a Yerusha, which comes on its own. Lo kana, in all situations, lo kana klal, it's not a kinyan at all. V'shani hasam, and it's different over there. Again, the question then is, in the case of the Brisa, why do they need to make a second chazaka? That first chazaka should be sufficient because it was just an uber and there was a miscarriage. No reason to say that there's any kinyan. But Rava says no, V'shani hasam is different over there. Gabi hamachzik barishona. In that case, in that first chazaka that they made, haidelo kanim, when we say it wasn't a kinyan, lav mishum uberhu. It's not because of the fetus. Ta'ain uber yorish, because the fetus does not inherit anything. That was not what prevented the kinyan from being effective. Elamei karka she'echziku. Rather, what happened was as follows: when they originally made the chazaka, rifuye merafion biyadayu, they weren't really sure what was going on. Kishemeitz hageru vizvizu nechasav. When that convert died and they swarmed upon his property to make a kinyan on the property, they really didn't know whether they were making a good kinyan. Ve'echziku, when they made that chazaka, lo niskavnu lahachzik legamri. They didn't have an intention to make a full chazaka to ha-mesavkalu, because they were actually in doubt at that time, im yesh lo yarshin im lav, whether he had heirs or not. Like we see that at the end they heard that there was a son, they heard that his wife was pregnant, they weren't sure if it was going to be an inheritance or not. Therefore, their chazaka is not a good chazaka. They have to make a new chazaka after the son dies, again after there's a miscarriage. And according to this answer, we can say that in general, an uber does not inherit, and if somebody tries to transfer something to the uber, it is not a kinyan. And so again, that's Rava's answer, that Shani Hasam, it's different over there. The Rafoim Rafi and Biyadayu Meikar, that again, from the beginning, they weren't really sure. That's why that first chazaka was not a good chazaka. And the Gemara continues, Mai Beinayu, what's the practical difference between the answer of Abaya, that a Yerusha Haba Meila is different, and the answer of Rava, that Rafoim Rafi and Biyadayu? And the Gemara says, Ika Beinayu, the practical difference between Abaya and Rava's answer is the following case. Let's say Sheshamu Bo Shemes, let's say they heard that the son had died, Velomes, but actually the son didn't die, V'achar Kach Mes, but then the son actually does die. That would be a practical difference between Rava and Abaya. And the Rashbam explains, Ma'ai beinayu bein le'Abaya bein le'Rava, whether you're following Abaya Rava, Chazaka Rishona lav klumi, the original Chazaka they made is nothing. Ma'ali mishum de'uber yoresh le'Abaya, what's the difference if the reason that Chazaka is not good is because the fetus inherited, like Abaya says? Ma'ali mishum de'refuye merafya le'Rava, what's the difference if the reason is because they weren't sure at the time of the Chazaka? My nafkul anmina, what practical difference is there? And the Gemara says, Ika beinayu sheshamu bo shemes v'lo meis v'achar kach meis. Again, the Gemara said, the difference is, let's say they heard that he died and he didn't die, but then afterwards he did die. The Rashbam says the explanation, Lashonos Rabim Shamati. I heard many explanations for this line in the Gemara. V'lo yasher be'enai, many of the explanations I heard, they don't seem proper in my eyes. Amnam, however, kein tzarich lefarish. Here's how you have to explain the Gemara. Ika beinayu bein Abaya l'Rava. The difference between Abaya and Rava is, B'chiyai gavna ger shamesu vizvizu Yisrael nechasav. Again, the convert died and the Jews, they plundered his property. V'echziku they made a chazaka. V'achar kach shamu she'ishto muberes v'shamu acharei chein shemesa uber. And so then they heard that his wife was pregnant, and they heard that the uber had died. V'adayin hayu muchzakin. And they're still in the process of making the chazaka. They think it's a totally good chazaka, that there's no yarshim. Inami or shechziku achar sheshamu bo shemesa. The case could be they made the chazaka after they heard that the child had died. V'lohaya meis, and he had not actually died kishashamu when they heard. El achar kach meis, but afterwards he did die. In other words, at the time they made that first chazaka, they were 100% certain that their chazaka was good. Actually, it wasn't true that the chazaka was good, maybe, because the son was actually still alive, but then the son actually happened to die. So the difference is as follows. Li Abaya da'amar uber yoresh, according to Abaya, who says that the fetus inherits, mishum dahava Yerusha haba me'eleh, because again it's an automatic Yerusha, hamachzikim rishona kodem misas uber lo hachziku, that original chazaka would not be a good chazaka, ela machzika achar misas, so it's only good if you do it after the child died. Ula Rava the tali taima berefuye, but according to Rava, who says the reason the first chazaka is not good is simply because they're not sure. So hamachzikim rishona shashamu bo shemes. So those first people, when they first heard that he died and they made that chazaka, have a chazkas and chazaka, they were actually 100% sure, even though they were wrong, but they were 100% sure, and therefore the chazaka is good. And the Rashbam continues, v'aval bishenodi levasov shadayin lo meis, even though it became known at the end that the child hadn't yet died, mikol makom lo merafya b'yadeim, nevertheless at the time of the chazaka, chazaka. It wasn't a situation where they were uncertain. Kevan sheshamu bo shemes, because they had heard that he had died. Va'uber lo yotza la'aver olam, and the uber, the fetus, wasn't yet born. V'lo zacha li'arish, so there was no inheritance of the uber. To l'Rava eno yorish at sheyotza li'aver, because again, according to Rava, it's not a yerusha until the child's actually born, and so therefore that chazaka would be good, that first chazaka, according to Rava, and so therefore v'hamachzik b'shniya achar misas uber lo have cheskas and chazaka. So therefore, the one who made the second chazaka after the death of the uber, it's not a chazaka. Kein nira beinai ve'ikr. The Rashbam says that seems to be the proper explanation, and the Rashbam summarizes lashon katsar. The short version here is ika beinayu sheshamu bo shemesa uber. The difference is they heard that the fetus had died, and they made a chazaka v'hu lo meis, but the fetus had not yet died. Ela achar kach meis, but he did die after. Ubo acherim lahachzik. So others are not coming to make a second chazaka. L'Rava cheskas rishon l'marafi. According to Rav, again, that first chazaka was not a situation of uncertainty. Sharei shamu shemeis, because they had heard that the child had died, the uber had died. V'niskavnu lahachzik l'gamri, and so therefore they had full intention of chazaka. V'kanu, and they acquired the sof for uber lo yotza la'aver olam, because still the uber was never born. V'lo yirashmidi, never inherited anything. Uli Abaya, but according to Abaya, achronim kanu would be the later ones who made the chazaka that would make the effective kinyan. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Mishnah Meseches Nida, Tinok ben Yom Echad. It says that if you have a child that's 1 day old, nochil umanchil, so that child's able to inherit, and that child is able to bequeath. And so we infer from the Mishnah, ben Yom Echad, that if the child is 1 day old, meaning the child was born, so then it's possible to inherit. But uber lo, but let's say it's still a fetus, apparently a fetus does not inherit, and therefore again this is a question on Rav Sheshes, who says that mezakel uber, somebody who transfers something to an uber, it is a kinyan. Here we're saying even with regards to inheritance, which is something that's memela, there's no inheritance for an uber. And the Gemara says, Ha'amar Rav Sheshes, but Rav Sheshes said on that Mishnah, Nochil b'nichsei ha'em, that the case over here actually is that the child is inheriting the property of its mother, lahanchil la'achen min ha'av, in order to bequeath to the brothers from the father, meaning to the paternal brothers. And for that, v'dafka ben yom echad, for that particular situation, the child has to be 1 day old, aval uber lo, but a fetus that would not apply to. My time, or what is the reason? And the Rashbam explains, Tashma, come here the following proof, T'tanan b'Meseches Nida Perak Yotzei Dofen, we learned in the Mishnah Meseches Nida, Tinok ben Yom Echad Metame ben Egoyim bad Nochel u'Manchel. We talk about things that a child can do at 1 day old, until the idea that he can inherit and bequeath. Uparchinan beGemara, the Gemara over there asks, Nochel miman. Now, who is this child inheriting from? May Aviv, so he's inheriting from his father. So then Manchil aman. So then who is he bequeathing to? La'achin min ha'av, would be his paternal brothers, but he doesn't need to bequeath to them. Achin ibo minei lirsu, ibo me'avim lirsu. When it comes to the brothers, they can inherit from their brother, but they can also inherit directly from their father. So he's not really bequeathing to his brothers, since the brothers can get from the father directly. Umay nafkulan mina b'hai tinuk. So what do we care about this tinuk, about this child who has died? Doesn't change the inheritance at all. Afilu kilo bali olam haisu yerusha nofeles lifnei elo achin. Even if there was no child at all, so still the inheritance would go to these brothers. So what exactly is the case? That's the question in Meseches Nida. And the Rashbam continues, Umeshaninon. So then we answer, what's the Mishnah talking about? Amar Rav Sheshes says, Nochel b'nichsei ha'em lahanchil la'achin min ha'av. We're actually talking about the fetus, or the 1 day old child rather, inheriting from the mother and then transferring to the paternal brothers. D'minei kayarsi kagon Rachel sheyoldes Yosef. Because again, they're going to inherit from this child. For example, the case would be, let's say Rachel gives birth to Yosef. V'meisa Rachel b'yom shenolad Yosef. Let's say Rachel dies on the same day that Yosef is born. V'yoresh asimo. So then Yosef would inherit his mother. Sharei ben yom echad nochel, because if he's 1 day old, so he's going to inherit his mother. V'yachar kach meis, and then that child Yosef dies. U'manchil Reuven v'Shimon b'nei Yaakov. So then it's going to go to the paternal brothers. That's Reuven and Shimon, who are the sons of Yaakov. Shein achiv me'aviv, that's his paternal brothers. D'minei de Yosef yarsi, because they do inherit from Yosef. V'lo me Rachel, but they don't inherit from Rachel. Sharei eina imam, because Rachel is not their mother. Hachi isa b'Meseches Nida. That's explained in Meseches Nida. V'hachi hu deparchin. And so over here, what's going on is as follows. The Gemara is asking, Tashma, come in here, Tinok ben Yom Echad nochel u'manchil ben Yom Echad in uber lo, seems to be saying that only when the child is born he inherits, but not as a fetus. Alma uber eno yoresh Yerusha. You see that a fetus does not inherit the memela, because even by Yerusha, which is memela, which happens automatically. V'chol shekein da'mezakel uber lo kana. And certainly, if somebody would actually transfer to an uber, certainly that's not a kinyan. If there's no Yerusha, there's certainly no kinyan in mezakel uber. V'kashel Rav Sheshes. That's the difficulty against Rav Sheshes from this mission of Meseches Nida. Umeshani Amar Rav Sheshes Nochel. The Gemara then answers that Rav Sheshes says, again, we're talking about the situation of inheriting from the mother to give to the paternal brothers. Now this answer of the Gemara, it's really in a different context. That's the answer that's found in Meseches Nida, Misham Koshi Achrisi, because of just that general question, that other question that we just mentioned above, Kidafrishas Le'el, like I explained earlier. V'nira be'einayin, so the Rashbam says, it appears to me, Dehachi Garsinan, the proper text is as follows. Ha'omer Rav Sheshes Nochel b'nechsei ha'am, didn't Rav Sheshes say, that, meaning in that other context, that the case is the child is inheriting from the mother. Therefore, if it's from the mother, since on that day that the child was born, the mother's dying, that's why it has to be that the child was actually born, and it was actually born into the world, and then the mother died, and then the child died, and then bequeathed to his paternal brothers. But let's say it would be a situation of a fetus. Lo, you couldn't say that. It's not possible for a fetus to inherit from his mother while he's still in the womb of the mother, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Mem Beis Amud Beis.